Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive. Hey, it's AZ. Thanks for listening to the podcast. I have a favor to ask of you. I recently noticed that somebody gave me a 1-star rating on Apple Podcasts, and that kind of makes me sad, but also I just don't understand why you ever give someone a 1-star rating. But that said, I would love it if you would hop over and rate me and review me on any podcast app that you listen on. And then also, if you feel like I could be doing better in the podcast, I would love it if you'd send me an email, info@firerescuewellness.org. Okay, today I sat down with someone who's really special to me. I met this person in person finally in November of 2019 when we were all out at NSCA National Headquarters with a bunch of coaches revamping the TSAC practitioner course. And who would have ever guessed, almost 6 years later, I am his graduate student. I am his neighbor, and we have these freaky high-level conversations almost every day about firefighter health and wellness. But this past week, Jay, Dawes, and his wife April came over. We had some nice steaks, and then we sat down and recorded a podcast to answer a listener's question, which was about balance. And I'm not talking about the balance like standing on one foot in your socks with your eyes closed, that kind of balance. I'm talking about the balance of how much strength training, how much yoga, how much speed and power training. Like, how do we balance all of these things in our life with our nutrition, with our shift schedule, with our kids? So I think Jay did a really good job answering these questions. And yeah, I'll just let the podcast speak for itself. Have a great day. Hey listeners, welcome back. It is AZ with the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast, and I am here with a very special guest, Dr. Dawes. Say hello.
Hello.
We are at my kitchen table. April's here too. Hi, April. We're at my kitchen table. We just had a nice dinner, and this is a new subtopic for Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast called Whiskey, Wine, and Whining. Cheers. So, first of all, it's been a long time since you were a guest, over 2 years ago.
Yeah, somewhere in that neighborhood. Lots changed.
What news happened? Tell me everything.
Well, I picked up a graduate student who's been really obnoxious and difficult to work with. But
Damn.
Other than that, life has been pretty good. So
yeah, those graduate students can be a lot. And you also got a really, really lousy neighbor.
I know, it's terrible. So
the worst. Okay. Since we met you 2 years ago, we'll probably not do the 3 big questions.
Okay, fair enough.
We'll skip those. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about your current bio?
Oh gosh. So current bio. So I'm a professor at Oklahoma State University, where I get to supervise a outstanding graduate student, Annette Zapp, and also the co-director of the Tactical Fitness Nutrition Lab.
With Dr.
Jill Joyce.
Who is amazing, by the way. Funny side story. We're probably going to have a lot of these tonight. Jay asked me a question today. He said, "Hey, what are you doing on Good Friday?" And I said, I don't know why. And he said, well, what are they doing? Recognizing us.
Yeah.
At the baseball game. And so there's going to be tickets and whatnot. Can you go? And what was my question?
I don't recall.
What time is it?
Oh, right.
It is bedtime adjacent. 6 p.m. bedtime adjacent. But I will be there supporting the Cowboys. Go Pokes. That's what I'm supposed to say, right?
That's what you're supposed to say. Pistols firing. So
we are here today to answer a listener question, and I've gotten this question more than one time. And basically the question is, how do you find balance in your training? Mm-hmm. Meaning, you're working so hard on getting strong and getting hypertrophy, and then you realize, oh crap, there went my cardiovascular ability, and then you start chasing that. So that is the question. Mm-hmm. I have all kinds of opinions, but I want to hear yours first.
Yeah.
Because you're the real PhD.
Well, I think at the end of the day, what it gets down to, one of probably the best analogies I've ever heard for this is at the circus, they have the plate spinners, right? So you've got all these, these sticks, and there's plate spinning on top of it. And when one of the plates starts to toggle a little bit or starts to waver, what do?
They all fall apart.
No, they walk over and they just hit it just a little bit just to keep it going a little bit longer.
Evidently, I've not been to the circus
Apparently
enough.
You're not. So this is a whole new cultural experience we need to talk about further. But yeah, I mean, so basically what they do is they'll go over and they'll just use two fingers and they just like hit it just to keep it going and keep the momentum going just a little bit more. So I think when you're looking at maintaining the different physiological attributes, that's really what it gets down to, is whenever those different attributes start to waver just a little bit, if you go in and touch on them, then you can help maintain and preserve them for a longer period of time. Now, and different attributes have to be touched on more often than others, and I think that's kind of what the trick is, making sure that, if we're looking at like in the first responder space, and obviously we've talked about this before, but you got to be pretty good at everything all the time. You don't have to be exceptional at any one thing. But I think that's the thing, is when you chase one specific physical attribute at the expense of everything else, then, that's going to impact job performance and, a lot of other aspects of just, normal living as well. So, I mean, really, I think that's going to be the big key, is like when you start to notice those physical attributes starting to drop off a little bit, if you can just go in and touch on them a little bit, you can maintain and preserve for actually a pretty decent amount of time.
I knew you were the right guy for this job. So what is that amount of time? I mean, is it individual? Is it physiology? What's that amount of time?
Yes, the answer is both.
The answer is yes.
Well, and this is one thing. I mean, it's not an exact science, obviously. But if you look at, some of the work that Vladimir Isern did, so looking at block periodization and detraining and trying to figure out, how long can I not do certain things before I start to see those physical drop-offs, that's a really good place to start. But I mean, in general terms, if you look at things that are, I don't want to oversimplify this, but and there's going to be some listeners who are like, oh, that's way too simple. And it probably is going to be a bit of an oversimplification, but things that are like really highly neurologically demanding, like power and speed, they tend to drop off a lot faster than things that are, slower, I guess, in nature. So like, aerobic capacity training, you can maintain your aerobic fitness for, a decent amount of time, in relation to like your speed training. So if you look at the work of Isern, if memory serves correctly, I think he said 5 days plus or minus 2 or 3 before you start seeing drop-offs in your ability to be fast. So basically, if you're not doing, touching on speed at least like once a week, you're probably going to see a pretty rapid drop-off on that. And I think that's one thing, like, in general terms, especially with something like that, speed and power are going to be really critical for job tasks. And I think in a lot of training programs, you don't see people tend to touch on those as much. I mean, a lot of times it may take the form of more, circuit training, aerobic training, muscle hypertrophy or bodybuilding style training, which are all fine and all should be a part of what you're doing. But a lot of times those things that are done at those higher speeds kind of get pushed to the side, because I think a lot of people associate that with sport, and not necessarily with job performance all the time. But now granted, the amount of effort you would have to put in those to maintain those for what's required for the job is not going to be like if you're a track athlete, but you should still touch on those things periodically.
So give the listeners an example of when speed and power might be important to a firefighter.
Anytime there's a sense of urgency. So,
okay,
I mean,
answer.
which is like a lot of the time, I think. No, I mean, anytime where there's some sense of urgency where you need to do a task as quickly as possible. Again, even if, and the argument would be like, there's not a 1-for-1 trade-off with, doing a, 20 or 40 yard sprint with, trying to drag somebody out of a building, but it's still going to work on a lot of those high-end neuromuscular, outputs and, components that are going to be essential for doing that task, and again, I mean, it's a balance, right? So, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily advocate for people going out and, doing, really, really high intensity explosive work for huge volumes of training like a track athlete, but touching on that every once in a while is probably not a bad look. Like for instance, I'm 48 now. Once a week, I go up to the track at Oklahoma State and I'll do 10 sprints. So I'll sprint the length of it, and then I'll walk, jog, and kind of jog into the sprint, take off, walk again, and repeat that 10 times just so I'm touching on it. And also so I can have a little bit of street cred with the students and stuff like that. So when we go and sprint, I don't look like I've never done it before. And the good thing, I will say this, like I can hang with the ones that are slightly above average. So I'm not going to say I can hang with the really fast ones, but I can still do it. So, I mean, I think that's the big thing is like the secret is just as far as at least trying to maintain and preserve, touching on it once a week helps me maintain that speed quality, at least at some level.
Mediocrity. It's a goal. So how often do we need to touch on, so we talked about speed and power. How often do we need to touch on strength and hypertrophy type exercises?
Yeah. So the good news is like with strength and hypertrophy, it doesn't tend to have as rapid of a decline. And again, I'm going to give some general guidelines on this, and somebody more clever than I out there is going to say, "Oh, that's not exactly right," and it may not be exact, but I mean, give or take like a couple weeks. Like if you touch on hypertrophy and strength within a couple week time block, 2 to 3 weeks, you're going to be able to maintain it for a decent amount. You're not going to see as sharp a decline. You may see some drop off, but it won't be as rapid as if you were to not do anything. So if you just completely forsake strength training for months on end, yes, you'll see a big decline. But if you're at least touching on it like every week or every other week, then you should be able to maintain and preserve for a pretty good duration of time.
So not optimal, but we're preserving.
But good enough, right? So I think, and I think that's the whole question is like optimal. I mean, very rarely, I think, does anybody have a life that's going to yield itself to a optimal environment for peak performance. I mean, and I think the other, this I don't want to say it's a pet peeve because but it sets maybe a little bit of an unrealistic expectation. Is I think a lot of times I've heard people say, "Oh, we need to have them at an optimal level at all times," and you can't. I mean, if you look at the literature, you can only really maintain a peak in any one of these variables for a couple weeks. I mean, so you're talking 7 to 14 days. So I think the challenge is trying to maintain a reasonably high level in all those different things, even though you may not be at your absolute best. Because so I'll ask you a question: what does a firefighter have to do on the job?
Wow, everything.
Right.
I mean,
so if
the decathlete is what we need. They need to be strong. They need to be mobile. They need to have great cardiovascular capacity. They need to be powerful. They need it all. Right.
So, I think that's the point is like, if you have to potentially do anything on the job, you got to train for everything. And you don't have to be amazing at any one aspect of it, but you have to be adequate enough to do the job. Now, obviously the higher level performer you are, probably the better opportunity you're going to have to be to do all those job tasks. But there does become a point of diminishing returns where you go, okay, I mean, you can squat a Buick, awesome. So if you can squat a Buick with a person in it, does that make you significantly better on the job? Maybe, maybe not. But then at that point, we have to worry about, by chasing that goal, are you actually increasing your opportunity for injury? So it's trying to figure out, what that balance looks like. I mean, and some of it's not even the job. Some of it's just personal goals. If you want to do something because you think it's really cool, like I'm like the last person who's ever going to say, don't do that, but just know risk reward. This is the level of risk I'm willing to accept to chase that goal. And again, anytime you're chasing the top levels of performance, your option for getting hurt goes way up. It's not a bad thing. It's just something that you have to understand and be willing to accept.
Well, and I think for an athlete, it's
worth it because it's winning.
It's worth it, right?
Right. I mean, because I think that's the thing is like winning is usually for a finite period of time. Whereas if you look at a first responder, like I need you to win for 20 years, and I think that's the thing is like, what does it take to be at a level where you're able to do your job for 20 years without, significantly increasing risk of injury? Because anytime you work out, there's always a risk. And if you do get hurt, can I get you back on the job faster?
Yeah.
But I think that's really what it is, like trying to figure out, what is that level that's going to allow you to perform all the things that you need to do and enjoy life and do all the life things that you want to do as well. Because I think, that's the last thing I ever want to do is look at a first responder and go like, I think too many times in the tactical strength and conditioning space, we think of it more unidimensional and not really accounting for, do remember these are human beings who have personal goals. And and you've probably seen it before where, a first responder wants to run a marathon because they just always wanted to do it. It's like, you know what? Go do it. You check that box. That's great. But, realize like we still need to make sure you're strong enough to do your job. So you do have two goals here that are going to be kind of competing with one another. And, you may have to accept that you're not going to have your, best potential marathon performance that you could have, but you can still do pretty well. And again, it gets down to accepting, what's, I don't want to say what's good enough because that sounds really bad, but it's trying to figure out, what's going to fill that bucket for you and what are you going to be able to accept.
So basically, what is that minimum dosage that gets you where you need to be? So I have a question. Well, actually, first a statement. I was never less fit to do the job than when I was marathon training and when I was physique athlete training. Never less fit.
There's absolutely nothing about being a physique athlete, like when you're trying to taper for a competition, that is like conducive to being healthy and fit. I mean, it's literally about hitting a goal.
Right.
But I mean, a lot of athletes will tell you that too, where it's like, basically in order to chase that specific goal, you have to be so focused in on it that there's a lot of other things that you kind of have to forsake in order to realize the top end of performance in that space. Charlie Kornhauser, so one of my most favorite people ever.
Love Charlie.
So I think he'd be okay with me telling this story, but we were working on some research one day and he and Ryan Holmes were in my office and Charlie was getting ready to compete in a bodybuilding competition. And I look over and his head is just down on the desk and he's just laying there. I'm like, buddy, you okay? He's like, dude, he's like, I'm in a cut right now. And he said, it's funny that in order to look your best, you have to absolutely feel your worst. And I mean, he looked amazing. I mean, he looked like, a calendar model. I mean, no question about it. But I mean, he just felt terrible. So, I mean, I think that's the thing is that you can do it and you can do it for short, intermittent bouts of time. And again, if somebody wants to do that, go get them. I mean, I get it, but just, realize like what are the consequences of that? And again, risk reward, like what does that look like? I mean, am I willing to sacrifice certain things in order to achieve that top level performance in a specific area, realizing that everything else may suffer?
Yeah. Well, and when we talk about an athlete, we are pretty optimal with an athlete, with their sleep, with their nutrition is dialed in, with their stress level, it's all dialed in.
Right.
We're not dialed in.
Well, I mean, so this is probably, again, non-popular opinion. Athletics is a really selfish lifestyle. I mean, it just is, because it all revolves around training and the competition, and you've got people there to serve you to make sure that you are able to be at the highest level possible. Whereas if you look at the first responder space, it's absolutely flipped the other direction, where you're there to serve everybody else. And unfortunately, a lot of times first responders don't get that attention where they have the opportunity to be a little bit more protective of their time in order to reach those goals. So it's a real fine balance. And I think, you talk about minimal effective dose. It's, what's the least amount that I can do in order to help stay fit? And, it's a real challenge. And, there's a lot of research out there and evidence that shows what it takes to help preserve things. Recognizing that there are going to be times, I mean, and this is just a normal human thing during our lives, like we're not always going to be in a position where we're able to be 100% dialed in on training. And if anybody tells you that, that's just, I don't believe that's accurate. You can still do things. Well, all right, let me rephrase that. If you can tell me that, you probably do have a reasonably selfish lifestyle where where you can literally dedicate everything to what you're doing yourself. And that's fine. But I think most people are not in that space. So it's not necessarily reasonable to assume that everybody can achieve that if they don't have if they're not playing the same game, basically.
Yeah, they're not starting at the same starting line.
Sure, for sure.
So I had a question for you, but we're going to come back to it.
Okay.
What matters in terms of fitness variables for first responders? What matters?
Oh my gosh.
I know. I love this conversation. All
of it is really the cop-out answer, but yeah, kind of all of it. I mean, it really does. I think to me, it's less about what matters and how much of it matters, I guess. Because I think, again, if you look at job descriptions and whatnot, like if you look at a firefighter, aerobic capacity is probably going to be a little bit bigger deal for them than like a law enforcement officer, because law enforcement officers, their essential job tasks that are critical usually tend to be a little bit more anaerobic in nature. On the flip side of that, in order to recover from high intensity anaerobic bouts, you need to have a good aerobic fitness base. So it's trying to kind of balance those different variables out. And I think to your point earlier, and like with aerobic capacity for a firefighter, well, yeah, you got to have good aerobic capacity, but you also are in PPE that, weighs a lot. So if you get, if you're not as strong, that's going to be a struggle there, and that's going to, increase the aerobic demand. So it's about striking the balance. And
there's that word balance again.
I know. And like I said, again, it sounds like a super cop-out answer, but I think the reality is like nobody really 100% knows at this point. I think it's one of those things where, we always joke about it being aggressively mediocre. I think that's really kind of it. It's like if you are pretty okay at all this stuff, you'll probably be fine. Yeah. If you're above average in all these different variables, you're probably going to be able to do your job, no question. Now, again, would I love to see higher levels of fitness in certain aspects? Is that probably going to make you more proficient on the job? Sure, I think it will. But I think, really what it gets down to is you got to be pretty okay across the board in order to be good.
Aggressively mediocre.
Very adequate. So
you need to be very adequate. Well, the other thing we need to get into is that, the person that addressed this question holds, the rank of a battalion chief, as opposed to we've got someone brand new in the service, we've got a line officer, we've got the chief who sits at his desk. So we have to consider, I think, rank when we're looking at what's truly important, because with rank also usually comes age.
Sure.
So how do we factor the age into it when we're thinking about all of these things?
It's a factor, obviously. I think it's one of those things where recovery time is going to be a bigger factor. You can still train in relative terms hard. No question about it. I know people who are in their 50s and 60s that train harder than I do because they're super fit. So part of that's it's an individual factor. So, one is it's not necessarily your chronological age, but your physiological age. So, how well have you taken care of yourself up to this point is going to dictate a lot about how hard you can actually push. We probably should talk this through, but looking at it from a rank level, I would argue that you still need to be job proficient at whatever rank you're at, because even, when things get bad, there is still a probability that you may get called out and you may have to help. If it's all hands on deck, you're still going to have to be able to do the job. So I recognize that the different levels are different bureaucracy and different things that you have to deal with. But at the same time, if you're a firefighter, you're first and foremost, you're a firefighter. So you've got to be able to do that job. So maintaining that across the occupational lifespan, regardless of rank, to me would be a priority. And I think learning how to navigate the challenges of each one of those different ranks becomes, the factor. I wouldn't necessarily, definitely wouldn't give that the out clause of, well, you don't have to do this anymore.
Yeah. So now I have the hardest question of them all.
Oh, no. Okay.
So how do we program? If we're trying to hit these things in a minimal, effective dose fashion, how do we program? Intelligently.
Next question. Well, all right. So in all seriousness, and this is the one thing for everybody that's listening, I will say there's no one right way to do this. And, again, that will be debatable with some people. But I think in general terms, if you're hitting all those major physiological attributes that we talked about over a couple week period, you're probably going to be pretty good at most things. Moderate to vigorous activity level if you're hitting that reasonably hard. And again, with a couple of obviously lower intensity days in to recover. But, and then we for, I guess, the listeners, we actually just got through writing a book chapter, and part of that
was horrible ordeal.
It ended up great. But
It did.
But looking at like daily undulated periodization and weekly undulated periodization, I mean, those are pretty good strategies, especially, those two concepts as well as maybe flexible periodization, which all those three things can kind of live almost together, really, if you think about it. But so like a daily undulated periodization model will be like, okay, over the course of a week, I'm going to have one day that focuses on hypertrophy, one that focuses on endurance, and maybe one that focuses on strength power. Or you could even go as far as going, I'm going to do hypertrophy, strength, power this week. Next week, I'll start off with endurance. I'll hit hypertrophy, strength, and then just kind of cycle those through. But I mean, if you're touching on each one of those, I mean, those different variables at least a couple of times, within a 2-week time frame, you're probably going to be okay at it. Now, again, are you going to be reaching the upper echelons of performance and getting as strong as you absolutely can? No, but you'll probably be pretty good across the board. You'll be able to endure. You'll have a decent amount of muscle cross-sectional area or size, which sets the stage for strength and power. So it all kind of works together. And if it's not one of those things where you just absolutely have to be at your absolute strongest on this day and this time,
July 5th.
right. Yeah, then again, you got some room to play there as far as that goes. And I think what ends up happening if you see some of those variables like tapering off a little bit, where you're like, man, I really feel like I'm not as strong as I could, we'll throw an extra strength day in. That's legal, you can do that.
Well, and that also gives you the time to work on mobility, to work on speed training, which some people, when they're so regimented with their resistance training, they don't have any time left.
Right. Well, I mean, and I think that kind of goes off into another topic, so I'll touch on that real quick. So looking at like compatibility of training variables too. So if you look at like on your different days, like you may have different things that are better suited to those days. So like if you're doing a strength day, like do some low level plyometric work on that day, because those two things tend to go together. If I was going to do a strength day, I probably wouldn't go out like on a long run and then do strength training, or even vice versa, because those things don't really jive together very good. But I mean, you can kind of break that up to where maybe you're doing your strength training on 3-4 days a week and do some aerobic training in between, and doing a little bit of your maybe your high intensity interval training or fartlek training and stuff like that, where you're touching on some aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity, and again, just kind of weaving it in over the course of the weeks. Another option, so instead of the daily undulated, would be like your weekly undulated periodization. So like maybe, week 1 is endurance, week 2 is hypertrophy, week 3 is strength, week 4 is power. And if you look at that, kind of how that rolls is usually the higher training volume would be on your endurance week. And then it'd be lower intensity, higher volume on the endurance week. The following week would be like, if it's more your hypertrophy training, it'd be like more moderate volume, moderate loads. And then strength would be, higher intensity, lower volumes. And then your power would be, high speed, slightly lower intensity or loads in terms of the amount of weight you lift, but not the effort provided. And then the volume is going to be lower. So that kind of leads to a nice natural progression where if you pick up endurance next week, you've kind of tapered it already. And then, like I said, on those weeks, I mean, like aerobic capacity, I mean, touch on it a little bit each week, but I mean, on the weeks where you're doing like a lot in the weight room, well, don't do as much aerobic work that week, and then, as you go into, some of the other weeks, maybe you kind of mix that up with some of your interval style training and things like that.
Talk to me about plyometric training for firefighters.
Yeah, you can do it.
Talk to me about how you program it. In terms of what I see a lot of times is firefighters doing, say, box jumps for time, or using plyometric exercises as conditioning. All
right, so that would, I always say that's kind of a no-no. I mean, as far as doing that, I mean, plyometric exercises for time is fine as long as it's like 8 to 10 seconds. But I wouldn't probably go out much longer than that. I mean, well, and again, this gets to be a debatable point, but if you're looking at really trying to maximize your power, you're going to get power drop off after a certain point and neurological fatigue. typically if you're giving out all out maximal efforts, I probably wouldn't go more than 5 to 10 reps. I mean, depending on how intense the exercise is. The higher the intensity, the lower number of repetitions I would do is kind of what it gets down to. When you start looking at doing one that's, obviously really popular is like box jumps for time. The problem with it is again, typically what ends up happening, if you're doing it to develop power, as fatigue sets in, you're going to see that power start to drop off, and you're not really going to be optimizing that. So like you said, at some level, it starts to become a conditioning workout. And honestly, there's probably a lot more intelligent ways of doing conditioning that would reduce your risk of injury. Because that's probably where I would be concerned with it is it's not, again, there's going to be some super fit people out there. They obviously can do it, but the question becomes is it a good idea to do it? And you might be able to get away with it. So I'm not saying that you can't, because again, people are going to say, oh, I do it all the time. It's like, well, good for you. That's awesome that you haven't gotten hurt, but the opportunity for injury goes up doing something like that. Just because it's highly neurologically demanding, it requires a lot of skill and technique. And, again, as fatigue starts to ensue, technique starts to break down, and your opportunity for injury goes way up. So if it were me, if I was doing plyometric training, I'd be short and sweet about it. Go in. I mean, honestly, if you look at a beginner, the general recommendation is about 80 to 100 foot contacts. If you're doing that, I mean, I'd even venture to say starting at 40. So do 40 foot contacts, go at a little bit higher intensity, allow plenty of recovery time, and you can always add more to it later if you're not seeing the results you want. But I'd start out, almost half what the recommendation is, because you got a lot of other stuff that you have to do. And so, the more you do of any one thing, the more you're going to get interference effect with maybe other variables. So again, touching on it, I think that's a really good way to improve that explosiveness and power. And if you want to get your conditioning training, I would probably, do your high intensity functional training and circuits and stuff like that. Just don't put the 100 box jumps in there. I will say this, one of the first workouts that I saw at a training academy was 7 minutes of burpees.
Oh my God.
Well, and this is the thing, there were some super fit people who did really good, better than I could have for several minutes into it. But a lot of people, after the first 50 seconds, it was just carnage. It was really, really bad technique and form. And when you're looking at it, I'm like, oh God, this is getting ready to just be a disaster. So, I guess the other thing I would say is if you just have to do it for conditioning, again, I'm not a fan, so I'm going to go on record as saying that. But when you start seeing technique and form breakdown, just cut it there.
I'm going to ask you to riff on this while I keep notes when we have our early morning conversation. So I got to look for this note, but
for everybody listening, I'm sorry in advance. So early mornings, I get very existential and think. Right. So
sometimes I start it, sometimes Jay starts it. I want you to talk about just, your thoughts on using physical fitness as punishment. So you didn't throw that ladder properly, therefore I need you to do 100 burpees. So riff on that while I find this note.
Well, I think in general terms, if you do something to make people sad because they didn't behave and then you ask them to do it for fun, it usually doesn't end too well. So, from a motivational standpoint, it's probably not the best strategy. Now, I do understand that there's a rationale for utilizing that technique in order to get, I don't want to say control, but for basically teaching people to persevere through things that they don't necessarily want to get through. To, again, a little bit more, I hate to say the word mental toughness, but basically, can you endure? I think there's other things that you can do that don't necessarily involve exercise that you can get that same effect. Give them a chore that they don't want to do. It's like with kids, right? Hey, I really don't want to have to clean. Okay, well, hey, there's a rock over there. Go pick it up, move it over to that pile. And when you get done, pick it up, move it back to the other pile.
What's this hole doing in my yard?
Yeah, there's ways to make things that are psychologically challenging without making it punishing.
Right. Well, and the thing is, a lot of these kids, I call them kids, a lot of these people don't have a love for fitness to start out with. So our propensity for making them hate fitness is huge.
Right. And I think the hard thing, and again, I think anybody who's ever pushed themselves in physical fitness, they know that if you push yourself to a certain level, you come out of that experience a different person. No question about it. It makes you more resilient. You know that you can get through things that you maybe didn't think you could get through before. And that transfers over to a whole lot of other aspects of your life. So I'm a big proponent of that. I think the problem is getting people to want to do that. Yeah. Versus like I don't care if you want to do this or not. I'm going to drag you through this, unwillingly. And I do understand that that's a fine line because there's just, there's certain people that aren't going to enjoy that and they'll do it. And then they do come out like, yeah, I actually do feel better about that. But it's a fine line. I mean, I think this is where the coaching aspect of it gets so critical. It's like, you got to know who you can do that to and who you got to use a different strategy with. And I mean, to be honest with you, can I tell you in every situation what that is? I can't, because it is going to be, it's a challenge. No question about it.
Yeah. Well, guess what? I couldn't find the notes. So.
Oh, well, that's probably good for everybody. So.
I mean, there were notes in there, but not what I was looking for. So, so I think that we can wrap up with just one last question. So there's a lot different. It's a different question when we say, I want you to be training for performance as a firefighter, and I want you to be training for robust health as a firefighter. And so if we've got someone who maybe isn't in great health to start out with, talk about where we go with that person, the unhealthy person.
Yeah. I mean, this is something I always wrestle with, because I mean, the reality is, like, if you have the job, at any given day, you may have to perform. I mean, so whether I feel like in the weight room, I should not have you lift a heavy object because it may put you at risk, the reality is on the job, you may have to do it. I think it gets down to, there's certain places I might be more willing to accept that injury. So in the weight room, I'm really not. If you're in a burning building and you're trying to save an individual before, something bad happens, I'm a little bit more willing to accept that happening, because it's what you signed up for. It's what you have to do. And, that becomes a dire situation. In general terms, like, I would make sure that from a health standpoint, that there's at least an adequate enough base of health and fitness that will support performance. And, I think that gets back down to what you were talking about earlier, is like, a lot of time, it's not necessarily that people are awful in every single aspect of that. It's maybe a couple different areas. Now, in some cases they are. They're not good at any of it, and is what it is. But I think in general terms, like, you want to go in there and figure out, okay, where are the biggest opportunities for improvement, and try and attack those different aspects. So if you're a power lifter and you're really strong, but you have really poor aerobic capacity, well, I know aerobic capacity is going to be a big part of your job. So I'm going to try and help you preserve and maintain that strength as best I can. And we're going to focus a little bit more on aerobic capacity to help bring that variable up to whatever level we perceive as being the need. And similar to all the other factors. So, if I want to get stronger, but, maybe maybe I don't have a lot of muscle mass, like, well, more muscle is going to support more strength. So let's get you a little bit bigger, and that'll help you get a little bit stronger. And then that's going to help your power, and so on and so forth. So I think it's just really trying to identify, what are the areas that are going to help, get you to where you need to be, job performance wise, from that standpoint. But then, again, from a healthy standpoint, making sure, are you even a healthy human being? And some of that gets into, not just looking at, like, okay, could you do X number of push-ups, and, can you squat X number of pounds? But it's like, okay, like, blood work wise, like, what's that look like? Yeah. From a, high blood pressure standpoint, like, are we battling that? Is that something that we have to be aware of? And we have to kind of, try and find ways to mitigate the negative consequences of that. If you look at the job in general, I think from a stress response standpoint, in a lot of cases, when you're on shift anyway, at least, you're kind of in that hypervigilant state at all times, which, from a fight or flight standpoint and survival mechanism, that's a good thing. I mean, and there's like what, the old saying, stay alert, stay alive. Right. So, I mean, I know that that goes way back, but I mean, that's actually true. Like, if you're too subdued on the job, you actually increase your opportunity of something bad happening. So you have to have a certain level of awareness. But the problem with that is, like, when you're in that state, your body is preparing for, like, the fight and for, whatever is getting ready to come your way. So basically you get, blood sugar dump into the system, because you got to make sure that you have an available fuel source in order to utilize that. And that's a good thing if you use it. It's not good if you end up, sitting in a lazy boy or in a chair or a squad car for 10 plus hours and nothing actually happens. So you got that elevated blood sugar level, which is going to cause the counteraction of, insulin is going to get released in order to help uptake that. Well, I mean, especially for dudes, like, you tend to carry more, weight around the midsection. So when that insulin release comes in to counterbalance the blood sugar dump, then you're probably going to end up putting on more weight. A lot of times that's going to be near the midsection. That's going to be closer to the viscera of the heart, which makes you more prone to, sudden cardiac death, heart attack, and a lot of other complications. So, I mean, and I made this, and there's a whole host of other stuff that's going on, right? I mean, that's just like one example. But I think that's the thing is like from a hormonal standpoint, there's a lot of stuff that's happening, and this is going to sound like an out, and I don't want it to sound that way. To some extent, it's not, well, let me back that up. It's not your fault that that's happening. It's not, because that has to happen. There's not really much about these jobs that are super healthy. You have to do that to protect yourself. And even though it's not your fault, you're still responsible. So we know that, I don't want to say it's an internal dumpster fire that's going on, but it kind of is. So we've got to do something to counteract what the job does to you. And, with law enforcement, I think it's Kevin Gilmartin, he actually made the comment one time that, honestly, when you come off shift, just get on the treadmill for 20 minutes and just walk. Get rid of some of that excess blood sugar that's in your system, help clear that out and burn that off so it doesn't collect and lead to a downstream effect of, all the negative health consequences that come with that, with, increasing, body mass. And, the other thing about that from a depression standpoint, that's the hard thing is like, you're in a hypervigilant state for an extended period of time. You get off shift, you're exhausted because you've been amped up that whole time. So a lot of times the last thing you want to do is go exercise. So you don't. And so, you increase your, body fatness, and your health starts to go down. You start to get depressed. You don't get that endorphin or that dopamine release you get from exercise. So now what do you turn to? Well, you turn to, all the other stuff, right? So, alcohol,
food, liquor, booze, gambling, porn,
video games, affairs. It's one of those things like, if I can't find a way to get that dopamine here, I'm going to find some way to get it. So, I think that's the thing is like, it leads to a whole, cascade, a downward spiral of different events, but, just doing something is going to be huge. And, I know some people want to hear the research, others don't, but there's some research, I think we talked about it, where, 13 minutes a day of moderate to vigorous activity will decrease your risk of all-cause mortality by like 30%.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's 13 minutes. We're talking, give or take, 70 minutes a week. But it's kind of one of those things where, that's the thing I would love is like, man, if you'll just give me 13 minutes, go in for 13 minutes, hit it hard for 13. Honestly, if you're like me, there's a difference between motivation and commitment. And there's a lot of days I have a zero desire to go into the gym. Once I get there, I'm good to go. But again, I'm committed to going because I've committed to doing it. And I think if you rely on motivation, that's a really inconsistent method of making sure that you're, kind of taking care of your health and fitness.
You brush your teeth because it is discipline and habit, not because you're motivated to do it.
Right. And it's disgusting if you don't.
It's disgusting if you don't. Okay. Well, I think we A, answered the question, B, did a deep dive on some other stuff, C, let the listeners know, don't write a book chapter. It's not fun. So I think we ticked all the boxes. Any final thoughts from the JDAWs? No,
I do think AZ will do another book chapter. So it's a pain. God. It's a pain you forget. It's the first or second one, I think. But, but in any case, no, I appreciate the opportunity to get to chat. And I think, that's the one thing is like, by no means do I claim to be an expert by any stretch of the imagination. I think it is kind of cool though, like when you start seeing the different trends and, seeing the different challenges that people have. I think the one thing that I will say is it seems to be more unifying all the challenges that people have and good people trying to find solutions to help remedy those things. man, the biggest thing I would just say is like, just, be consistent with what you're doing.
Yeah.
And, again, if you're trying to hit all these different attributes, so just having some kind of a logical method to follow in order to make sure that you're kind of checking off on each one of these at least a couple times a week. If you do that, you're probably going to be pretty good. I will say your odds of hitting a target are significantly better if you aim for it. So it's really important. Like, if you do want to work on these different attributes, like program it in, like, I'm going to hit muscle hypertrophy training 4 times this month. I'm going to hit endurance 4 times this month, strength 4 times this month. And if you do that, I mean, that comes down to about once a week, and you'll probably be pretty okay at that point. So those are, I guess, final thoughts is just consistency is really going to be the key.
And firefighters want to optimize things, but you can't optimize something until you're consistent with it.
That's very true.
It's very true. All right. Poor April's been sitting here listening to us. April has to listen to us do this crap all the time.
So April is my wife, for those that don't know. She is a gym, and she has to deal with me, which is more or less a full-time job, but she manages to do everything else as well, so it's pretty remarkable.
And she's an amazing artist and all of the things. So I'm not going to promise. I don't know if I can pull this off, but I may put a little program in the show notes. No promises, but we'll see. Just a little
little sample.
Little sample. All right, should we drop the mic?
We drop it.
All right, it's AZ, J Dawes, and April too, and we are officially out.